Outlawed.
Although the United States put a man on the moon first and ended the space race, they would not have considered it if it were not for the Soviet Union accomplishing putting a man into space, collecting samples of moon soil, and most importantly, sending the first man-made object into space. With the launch of the Sputnik satellites alone, the USSR contributed to the space exploration more than the United States did during the space race. In World War II, Hitler had risen to power in Nazi Germany and was determined to conquer Europe. At first, the USSR tried to cooperate with the Germans as they were the biggest threat to the Soviets. Although they made progress, Hitler attempted an invasion on Russia without hesitation, making the USSR and Nazi Germany enemies. As the US entered the war, both they and the Soviet Union saw an opportunity to form an alliance against the Nazis. The war ended with the Allied forces of the United States and the USSR in a victory. But even before the war, leaders knew that the ideas of both countries could never exist peacefully. Not too long after, the Soviet Union had broken promises with the Americans over democratic elections in Eastern Europe. Politicians viewed the USSR as a bully, controlling many areas of Europe. As a response, the US began to use resources in order to prevent communism from spreading. Both superpowers drove to gain supporting countries around the globe. Although no direct conflict occurred, tensions were sky high with both superpowers competing, knowing that the country with the most powerful arms would succeed. This was the Cold War. July 1955. Both nations were already competing over nuclear arms, doing everything to improve their technology. President Dwight Eisenhower had a proposition, an open skies policy, that would allow both countries to fly and use aircrafts for military observation. Unfortunately for Eisenhower, the Soviets rejected, forcing him to find other strategies for gathering Russian intelligence. On July 29, 1955, the US announced their start on building a scientific satellite. The Soviet Union responded with the same declaration. Both nations wanted to use satellites to spy on each other from space. The USSR had been working on an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM for short. Ukrainian Sergei P. Korolev was a rocket designer in the Soviet ICBM program. He and his team built the world's first ICBM, the R-7. He is known as the founder of the Soviet space program, as his achievement with rocket technology led to the success of the Soviets launching satellites. He designed a satellite that could be launched into space using the R-7, which became Sputnik 1. Sputnik 1 was launched on October 4th, 1957. Being the first ever man-made satellite in all of human history to orbit the Earth, it signified more than itself. The American public panicked. It was a simple object, a sphere shape of 58 centimeters in diameter, 4 antennas over 2 meters long, and a weight of about 184 pounds. Inside it was instruments to measure the density of the Earth's atmosphere, and it transmitted a beeping signal easily detectable, but at the time no one knew what it did. All they knew was that there was an enemy satellite streaking across the sky over the US, according to Nebraska studies, and it was evidence that the Soviet Union could send atomic bombs across the ocean.
I don't know if we would have done so much if it hadn't been for them, because the context was always, if they are better at rocketry, they can threaten us with missiles, and we don't want to be threatened with missiles. We want to keep up, so we can threaten them with missiles, and both, our country will be secure.
The USA had to act. Building a satellite became one of the highest priorities for America. This was especially challenging because only a small amount of effort was put into the satellite. In a memo regarding a conference with President Eisenhower, it states that Eisenhower recalled that timing was never given too much importance. To catch up with the Soviets, the satellite construction was rushed. It was noted that there was an insufficient amount of engineers. Attention was brought to the education of America, and a large emphasis was put on STEM subjects. As students began to learn this way, they were also fascinated about space. It was no longer imagination, as many students became engineers to work on space exploration or other technologies.
In school, there was huge interest in it. Everybody was into rocketry and things. They loved the idea.
The National Aeronautics and Space Act was signed for the creation of NASA. NASA would never have existed if the Soviet Union hadn't launched Sputnik. Sputnik 1 burned up and flew through the atmosphere on January 4th, 1958, after 1,400 orbits around the globe. Less than a month after Sputnik 1 was built and launched, the USSR had another surprise for the world. It was a 4-meter high cone with a diameter of 2 meters. Its name was Sputnik 2. The second satellite to orbit was launched on November 3rd, 1957, but this was not what it is famous for. Inside the satellite, along with the machinery, was a cabin. Inside that cabin was the first living creature to ever be in space. Her name was Laika. Laika was a 13-pound stray caught wandering the streets. She was taken into care before she would be used for scientific study of space. In the small cabin, the dog was provided with needs such as gelatin, food, and water, but only 10 days of oxygen. The Soviets stated after the launch that she would die in space, causing an outrage from many observers. It was originally said that she survived 7 days, but it was more tragic than that. In 2002, documents were released revealing a problem in the thermal control subsystem, meaning that Laika died of overheating only hours after launch.
It was a prelude to man in space, putting a man up there. They didn't want to risk a man's life.
Laika's story proved that life could survive in the emptiness of space. This was a relief to many, as Laika assured the survival of human explorers in space. By the time Sputnik 2 was launched, the US already had 2 failed attempts to launch a satellite. Eventually in 1958, Explorer 1 was launched, giving hope to the Americans. Sputnik 3 was built as the last of the official Sputnik family, but the countries competed on and on, pushing the limit of space exploration further and further until it was absolutely necessary to land on the moon for victory. The space race was a domino effect, with the initial push being Sputnik 1, creating the path to the moon. Without the Sputniks, landing on the moon would not have been important, let alone the discoveries made in the space race.
Would it be more accurate to translate Sputnik to companion or satellite?
That's weird, because in Russian it means Sputnik or Sputnitsa. They're always referring to that Sputnik, Sputnitsa, meaning your companion in life. You're a person that travels through life with you. And I don't know why they call it Sputnik. It also has come to mean satellite. I don't know why they would call it companion. I would say satellite. I mean, more accurate to say satellite. But Russians in everyday conversation use it to mean like your partner in life, your partner traveling through life, the cosmos of life with you. But I would say satellite. For me, if you say Sputnik to me, it means satellite. But what was the other thing? What was satellite or companion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, it means satellite, but probably to an average Russian it would mean, well, like your significant other, your boyfriend or girlfriend, your passenger through life with you. It's weird.
Заплатил немалые, не торгуйся.